So yeah, afternoon everyone. Just gonna get my talk in 7 minutes, and really enjoyed the session so far. So as James mentioned, what I'm going to be talking about today is understanding and managing burnout, and I think it's so important more now than ever, really, in a more remote climate, to understand exactly what this is and how we can go about managing it and preventing it to the best of our abilities. I mean, if you look at some of the stats, an Uncrushed survey said that 2 out of 3 sales reps were close to or experiencing burnout, and workplace stress is now the 5th biggest killer in the world. So there's some really big sort of numbers behind this. So just to give you some context, and obviously this topic, I could speak all day about it, and if you catch me in the networking afterwards, feel free to ask me more about it. But burnout, if you imagine it like everyone's got their container, and this container is our stress container. When stress keeps coming in and gets to a top and fills over, that's where burnout occurs. Everyone has a different size container, and there's different ways to relieve some of that pressure. But stress is our body's way of responding in a positive sense to a situation. It's actually helping us, it's serving us in that situation. And the perception of stress can have an impact of how we respond to it. Some of you listening to this might have a negative perception of stress, which means when it happens, that stressful event can spill over and cause you to have a stressful day, a stressful week. Some of you thinking, do you know what, I thrive off of stress. That can be good, but if you're putting your body in a stressful state constantly, it's like sticking the car in 5th gear. You're going to burn out eventually from it. And what happens is burnout occurs when, like I said, it sort of reaches this spillover point of this bucket, of this container, and spills over. This can be caused, there's a number of things, but I've picked out some things that maybe aren't always talked about here, by an excessive drive or ambition. I'm not saying anyone shouldn't be ambitious or driven, but I use the example, if you've ever been on a run or a gym session, you finished it, you feel amazing. The old adage is, you never regret a workout. But if you tried to do that all over again, your body would fail on you at some point. And that's why it's really important, particularly in sales, when we've had a good day, a good week, a good month, a good quarter, to just think about and ask your teams, is what you've done sustainable? You might need to obviously put the hard hours in and work weekends, but is that sustainable over the next 3 to 6 months? Is what you've done, and are you taking those pit stops along the way to recharge yourself? Another thing that's important here is neglecting non-work identities. This is what often leads to burnout as well. And what I mean by this is people getting overly infatuated with their job title, with their number, and forgetting who they are outside of work: a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a husband, a wife, a volunteer, a coach, a father, a mother, whatever it might be. And all of those things obviously make them great at what they do, and has probably got them that role in the first place. The problem is when you put all your emphasis on one thing, your job, this arbitrary number, and you're struggling, is all your self-worth and self-belief is in that number and in that job title. And when it's not going well, it's hard to have some perspective around it. So it's really important to encourage people to kind of, when you're sitting down with them in one-to-ones, is to be having that conversation of who they are outside of work, what value they're bringing. It's easy, obviously, in sales because we've got a number, we can measure that, but it's helping people reflect outside of work of the value they're bringing to people around them as well. I wanted to just touch on as well some of the things to spot that are difference between stressed and burnt out. So when people are stressed in your team, you'll often see over-engagement. You'll see people wanting to do more and more, even when, for example, maybe they aren't hitting their target, maybe when their plate is completely full, but they're stressed, so they're constantly wanting to help. Burnout is characterized by disengagement. So this is where someone is maybe not involved as much on the Zoom calls or in Slack, or isn't coming up with ideas as much before. Stress emotions are quite overreactive, so people can, be quite short-tempered and respond to things, become quite overwhelmed. Burnout emotions are often quite blunted. So this might seem like someone's lost engagement or isn't motivated or, isn't focused anymore. And in fact, they might just be burnt out when you're having a conversation with them and maybe you're delivering some feedback, some constructive feedback, and they just don't seem like they're taking it in. This could be where they just feel like quite numb to it because they're burnt out. And the final thing here is stress produces that kind of urgency and that hyperactivity versus burnout, which produces more of a helplessness and hopelessness, this kind of feeling of, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. Where I am right now, I'm stuck like this forever. So what are some of the things that you can do to manage and prevent this? Well, I've got 5 things. There's probably 20 things I could have talked about, but I want to keep it concise. The first thing is to encourage people. It's always good to obviously, want your team to come and speak to you, and I'm sure a lot of you have those great relationships where they do. But what's also useful is to encourage people to get what I call a mental health buddy. We get asked on a numerous time each day of how are you doing, how are you? And it's quite a superficial question. It gets a superficial response. because we become quite defensive sometimes. But if we can give people permission, if your team can give someone permission, someone else in the team, to say, look, Chris, if you see me on a Zoom call today and I'm not myself, or over the next few days, or I'm a bit quieter on Slack, you've got permission to check in with me and see how I'm doing. By doing that, by initiating that, your team are less likely to become defensive when asked about it. And what it does, it gets them to start talking more about how they're feeling, their mental health, their well-being, and avoids this being bottled up to a point where burnout occurs or some other things happen from it. The next thing is recovery plans. So it's great saying, have an afternoon off, have a day off, have a week off if people are struggling, if people are burnt out. But it's important when they've had that rest time, when they come back, to think, what are we going to do differently? Not just them, but you as a leader. What are we going to do differently this time to avoid that happening again, rather than it happening in 2 months again and needing another week off? You've got to be thinking differently when someone comes back and sitting down and going, right, this is what I'm going to do to support you. And this is what are you going to do as well to avoid us getting back to this situation? Rest is important, but it's, insanity is, doing the same thing over and over again. And sometimes that's what can happen. The third thing here is to lead by example. People will often do what you do, not what you say. So if you're telling people to switch off at weekends and in the evenings, don't be sending Slacks or emails on the evenings or weekends. Cue it for Monday, unless it's super urgent, which call them. But quite often it's not. When you're going on holiday, be clear why you're going on holiday. Tell them, you know what, I need to recharge. Be okay with starting that conversation that you want other people to be having in the team. Tell people you're going to switch off. Don't be emailing back and forth on holiday. Again, there might be people in your team that want to become a manager, that want to become a leader. They see that behavior and they instantly think, I need to follow suit. The fourth one is change the conversation around how you check in with people. So again, some simple ones here. Rather than just asking how you're doing, you could ask it twice. What it shows is it's not just a pleasantry. It shows you're genuinely interested in them. You can ask a scaling question. How are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10 today? They give you a low number. Okay, what's the reason behind that? They give you a high number. What's the reason behind that? It expands the conversation. It changes the conversation. It's a pattern interrupt for them as well. And then finally, creating clear expectations and support avenues for new starters. So it's great when people join the company, you're telling them what they can earn, the vision of the company, where you can get to. But if you're not telling them all the things they're going to experience of maybe after 2 or 3 weeks or a month, or when people say no to them when a deal falls through, and you're not telling them that, when they feel it, they're going to feel like, well, no one else has talked to me about this, so maybe I'm the odd one out. Maybe I'm not right for this business. Talking about these things proactively means when they come up, people feel more comfortable coming to you and talking to you about it because you've preempted it. So thanks everyone for tuning in today. If anyone's got any more questions about this, obviously you can ask in the panel, and I'll be in the conversation afterwards as well. But I really enjoyed coming on again. Thanks, James, for having me. And back to you.